First of all, I want to give you some feedback. There were a lot of discussion the last time when we were talking about cognac, brandy. So I think many
Mm.
of my audience, they are a little bit elder man, so they like that kind of discussion. And plenty of people agree with you, saying Spain has better brandy. So, um, yeah, even though in China cognac is very dominant, but a lot of people travel, so they do go to other countries. So there were plenty of
No.
people saying, "Oh, Alexander is correct. Spain has good good brandy, etc." So I myself finally figured that out. Okay, so brandy is made of grapes, and whiskey is made of grain, right? And then bourbon is made of corn.
That's
I
right.
I got that.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right.
Do you know? I just thought about. So there in the U.S., the two parties constantly trying to figure out what kind of people they should be working with. Who are more likely to be Democrat, who are more likely to be Republican. One of the things they discovered supposedly is that people who are drinking prefer to drink a brandy are more liberal. Bourbon are more conservative people drinking. Do you know that?
That's hilarious. That is hilarious. No, I didn't know that. That is hilarious. I find that extremely funny, I have to say. That is very, very funny.
And I even
Oh, well.
tested that. I even tested that with my mother-in-law, who I know is a longtime
Mm.
Republican. So at one point I asked her, I said, Betty, what's your prefer, between brandy and the bourbon? She said, oh, there's no difference. And I
Mm.
said, what if you have to, make a choice? And she
Mm.
said bourbon. So that's theory correct on her.
That's the, well, there you go. Well, there you go. I like
Yeah.
bourbon as well, actually. Very different from British whiskey, Scottish whiskey.
Okay.
Whiskey has a more dry sort of flavour, which I prefer, to be honest. I prefer it to the sort of slightly sweeter flavour of bourbon. But there we are. Americans always like things sweet.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah. That's
I
true.
remember going to a restaurant in Chinatown in New York, Chinese restaurant, very good Chinese restaurant,
Uh-huh.
and the waitress there, who was Chinese, was actually telling us this is why the Americans are so fat. She said because they like sweet food, whereas in Chinese restaurants, the food wasn't so sweet, which is
Yeah.
absolutely true.
That's true. Yeah. I agree. Okay. Let's start with the BRICS. I mean, we have talked about this before.
Yeah.
So far, have you, what's your general impression, and do you find anything surprising so far?
I found one small thing surprising, and it may not be of any great significance, but it is something that is different, which is that when Putin met the Chinese delegation, he referred to them as friends, and then he called them comrades. Now that
Okay.
is unusual.
Hmm.
I mean, bear in mind the Russian word "comrade" is "tovarish," which absolutely has has a resonance of the old fraternal friendship between socialist nations and whatever. So I mean that was unusual, and it was distinctively different from every other delegation that he greeted.
Hmm.
A few things to say about the BRICS. I mean, it's only the first day. They've all had a first private meeting in which just the leaders themselves were gathered together. Um, then Putin has been meeting with them each individually. Very warm meeting with Modi. Very warm meeting with Xi Jinping. The meeting with Xi Jinping came after the meeting with Modi, which seems to have been important. In every instance, when Putin has met with a delegation from the BRICS, with any of the leaders from the BRICS, he has been accompanied by a mass of officials. So it's not just one to one. There has been lots of other Russian officials participating. And I noticed that one constant presence was the governor of the Russian Central Bank, Elvira Nabiullina. And I assume that the reason she is there is because the primary topic of discussion is how to set up a finance and payment system bringing together the various BRICS states. And there's been a lot of discussion about this. So, those are, the opening impressions. Everybody looks very friendly. Everybody looks very happy to be there. All of the BRICS leaders are there, except for Lula, who
Hmm.
apparently is ill. He had an injury. And MBS, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, is not there. And we're told that the Saudi foreign minister will be there. But he wasn't there at the first meeting, the private meeting. So presumably he's still on his way. But lots and lots of other people are there as well, the BRICS states. I mean, the Prime Minister of Vietnam is there. The
Hmm.
President, I believe Maduro is there. Mahmoud Abbas is there. They're all coming. And Guterres, the UN Secretary
Yeah.
General, is there. And the smoke is coming out of the ears of the Western media about it all. And of course, Western governments are saying nothing about it. But anyway, it looks to be principally to be about finance and trade and taking the first step towards setting up a proper finance and trade system. And Russia's deputy foreign minister, who is a man called Sergei Ryabkov, who is known to be a particularly tough personality, and
Hmm.
who some people think will become the next Russian foreign minister, very likely, by the way. He actually said, look, this is going to be a long journey. We've got an awful lot to do. But that he said that our Chinese friends have this expression, that the journey of 1,000 leagues begins with a single step. We're going to make the first single step at this meeting.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure there will be some barriers. One thing I noticed, there's some discussion why MBS himself wasn't there. So the guessing is because he's under some pressure from the US. And the
Yeah,
other thing is
yeah,
Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan expressed interest. They did last year when there
mm,
was meeting in South Africa, but then they said not in real hurry. So that's also, is
yeah.
it that the US is working behind the scene to put pressure on those countries,
Well,
right?
obviously it is that. I mean, MBS himself is saying that it's because of the situation in the Middle East. But I mean, he
Okay.
could certainly have taken time off to come to BRICS. He's obviously under intense pressure from the Americans, and for that reason, he's made, I think, a wise decision to stay away. Bear in mind, he appears to have been the target of at least 2 recent assassination attempts, so he's got good reason to be careful. It does seem as if his foreign minister is going, and certainly the Saudi media are there in force. I understand that Kazakhstan is participating in these discussions in Kazan, though not obviously as a member state, but they too are clearly under intense pressure as well. Their president, by the way, recently met with Putin,
Hmm.
Tokayev. This is before the meeting started, and again made it very clear that for Kazakhstan, strategic course remains the one that we all know, which is to keep to hold together with the BRICS. If you remember, about a week ago, there was this sort of pre-BRICS meeting in Ashgabat in Turkmenistan, and all of the Central Asian states were there, including Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, all of the others. They all came and met Putin there, and I suspect a lot of the work with them was done previously at this other meeting.
Now, the Central Asia countries, we don't see much reporting about them, that they actually very, very important, both for Russia and and for China.
Mm,
And I think in the Great Chessboard, Brzezinski
mm,
had a whole chapter about Central Asia, right? We don't
mm,
talk much about that now.
yeah.
Why is that? Even though it's actually geographically, I would say politically, very important part of, isn't it?
It is a vitally important part. They don't talk about it very much because the game, you remember Brzezinski's book was The Great Chess Game, which is a
Yeah.
terrible title, by the way. I mean, you can't treat countries like chess pieces.
Hmm.
It's irresponsible and stupid to think in that way. But anyway, this game that was being played at the time when Brzezinski wrote the book, the US comprehensively lost. I mean, the first piece that they thought they'd taken was Afghanistan. And they were going to then leverage Afghanistan to expand into Central Asia. And they had two air bases, one in Uzbekistan and one in Kyrgyzstan. And they were pushed out of both. So they were basically pushed out. I mean, they lost the game then. Of course, the United States never gives up, and it comes back, and it's been trying to create tensions in the various Central Asian states to the extent that it can. But that was a major uh, geopolitical defeat for the United States, from which it has not recovered. And because they have not recovered, they don't really want to talk about it very much. But they still visit. I mean, Blinken was there a short time ago. I mean, they haven't given up on Central Asia. By the way, in my opinion, it is a losing proposition. Central Asian governments, regardless of where they come from and who leads them, eventually are going to have to come to terms with China and Russia because, well, look at the map.
Yeah. That's always my question. Many times they seem making decisions without looking at the maps. I mean, recently Mongolia, for example, wanted to build a railway, and China said no, and then they asked South Korea, well, where do you build it to? I mean, right? So even the raw material, everything has to go past China. I mean, what were they thinking? So yeah.
Well, exactly. Yeah. I mean, exactly. I mean, it's and ultimately, it is the geography dictates your political decisions. I mean, it's not obvious. Besides, I mean, there are a lot of clever people in Central Asia. It's a fairly well-educated place, by the way, just to say. And a lot of people there understand that not only are China and Russia, but China particularly, the economically rising places. But they're the places that actually have things to offer this region. The Americans are far away, and they can only in the end be a disruptive force in Central Asia. They can never be a constructive one.
They only want to build a military bases. I think that's what the American wants.
That's all it's all about. That's all that it's ever about.
Now the BRICS pay I find interesting is that it's not just about banks and financial institutions payments, but actually it has implications for consumers. So my understanding, if there's an app, you download it. So within the BRICS countries who participate BRICS pay, you can just pay with your own currency into another country, the other country's currency. I find that's interesting. I didn't know that. What is your view on that?
That's exactly right. I mean, this is clearly evolving, and it is evolving actually quite fast. And it's clearly intended to reach to individual citizens. By the way, again, I don't know whether people in China are aware of the fact, but there is an awful lot of talk in Russia about how this whole system is ultimately going to be built around SIPs. Now, I don't know whether you know what SIPs is, but SIPs is a system that China began to set up in 2012 and then perfected in 2015, which is intended to make it easier for the RMB to be used in external trade. So this is apparently going to be a major building block in setting up the system. I mean, SIPS has evolved itself fairly slowly, but apparently, it provides infrastructure, technical infrastructure, which is going to be used for this, because as the Chinese are ahead of everybody here, because as I said, they've been working on it for longer than anyone else has done.
Yeah, I mean, it looks very similar to like Alipay and WeChat Pay that I've been using, and it is really convenient. I mean, it makes me actually want the US to join the BRICS because then it's make my travel easier.
Make all our lives in the West a lot easier. But the interesting thing about this summit meeting in the BRICS summit meeting is that the British media don't want to talk about it. I mean, seriously, I was looking at the Financial Times this morning. There isn't a single article about the BRICS summit meeting. At least there wasn't this morning. And there have been several articles in the British media until today. Today, they're starting to shift, but there's been several other articles which talk about a Russian organized conference. They haven't mentioned the fact that it's not actually Russian. The Russians are, the host, but it is in fact the BRICS. They don't want to talk about this. It's quite extraordinary, actually.